Hey, this is Zero at ReviewZoneHD, and I'm bringing you guys a review for Dead Space 3 on the PlayStation 3. And I honestly didn't think I was going to be able to do this review, and I even made a video stating that I was canceling coverage last week, but I was able to find a way and time to make it happen. Now, the original Dead Space released in 2008, and it holds a PS3 Metacritic score of 88. Dead Space 2 released at the start of 2011, and it's rocking a PS3 Metacritic score of 89, and it's also one of my all-time favorite PlayStation 3 games. Then finally we come to Dead Space 3, which released last Tuesday and currently has a PS3 Metacritic score of 77, well below the other two. And a quick scan of the negative reviews really focused and complained on some of the changes that were made to the core experience, which the pacing of the game feels a bit slower compared to the previous two titles, but it was much more action-oriented when it does cut loose, throwing waves of enemies at you at a time. And it's easy to pick on a game when it changes course and offers a new, different experience. But is it as good as the previous two games and worth a day one purchase? Let's find out in the review. What I really appreciate about this entire series, and in this game in particular, is the fact that they can create a very dark and grimy environment that makes the lighting effects really stand out, but not so dark that it's annoying to navigate through. And I've played my fair share of games that the environments were just so dark that it really hurt the fun of exploring the game world, but that's just not the case here. They also changed things up a little bit as the entire middle of the game takes place in a snow-covered outdoor environment, traversing through ice caverns and up the sides of mountains. So you're not always going to be cramped into tiny hallways and dark corridors throughout this adventure. That was big change number one, and I'm really glad that they switched things up. Otherwise you would have had people complaining that it's the same old Dead Space that we've already played before. However, the enemies do look a lot like they did in the previous game. There's not a huge deviation from what you would expect to see, with the exception of the human enemies, which are in just a small portion of the game. But they did a great job of immersing you into the environment. You really feel like you're in space and on a new planet, and your point and purpose of being there actually made a lot of sense. As far as technical issues go, I really didn't come across that many. I had an enemy vanish in front of me once, and I had a minor issue climbing up a mountain at one point. Other than that, the game ran pretty flawlessly and was highly polished.
Hey! You talking to yourself again? Man, I worry about your sanity sometimes.
If you didn't play either of the previous two titles, you may not get as much enjoyment out of the story, but it does a nice job of catching you up to speed at the beginning. The opening sequence and the first few chapters are filled with several twists and desperation, but all that sort of melts away once you get into the meat of the game. The story throughout the entire series has been phenomenal. It's kept me interested and focused to see how everything's going to pan out, so no skipping cutscenes or zoning out on my end. However, during this go-round, your character is a lot more upbeat and sarcastic throughout the entire game, and the music felt like it was themed more for action than it was for horror. So between those two elements, it may have dampened the intensity of the situation and the storytelling, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it did detach me from caring as much when all the things that go bump in the night decided to chew on my face and throw a game over my way. It didn't carry that same sense of dread that the previous two titles had. In the first two, you really felt more like a victim at the mercy of others, barely scraping by. It was survival of the fittest, especially if you tested out the harder difficulties. In Dead Space 3, even with the faster enemies, you're given so much firepower that you never really feel helpless. And if you played the last two titles, you pretty much know what to expect, with stuff popping out right in front of you or behind you, or battles in which enemies are spawning behind you. When you add all that up, it's just not going to deliver that same gut-wrenching experience that you had before. And this is what some reviewers had a problem with, but I'm not in that same group. As I just mentioned, I like when games mix things up and they try new things, and in this case some of it works, some of it doesn't. The new robot buddy that goes out and collects crafting material and resources for you to help build your super duper weapons is a great feature. The new weapon system's awesome. It will make playing through the game multiple times and on harder difficulties all the more entertaining. You still roll around with 4 weapon options, just condensed into 2 loadouts, which in all honesty I'd much rather have quick access to 2 different weapons than having to swap between weapons or reload in the heat of battle. And this all goes back to the focus on the fast-paced action yet again. Luckily the controls were created solid enough to handle split-second decisions and movements, so you're more than capable of handling any encounter. There were times that I felt like I was playing an Uncharted game more than Dead Space, especially with how the story sequences played out, but let's talk about some of the negative additions. As far as the new co-op mode, I think it's awesome that it's there, and even more awesome that you can do additional missions and see some extra cutscenes when playing with a friend, but in all honesty, I don't have any urge whatsoever to play this type of a game with a friend. This is a horror title that I want to creep my way through and worry about what's waiting for me behind every door and corner, and when you have someone watching your back with a microphone on, all that kind of goes out the window. Maybe I'm just a stick in the mud old school gamer, but I played the entire time in single player and never once felt like I needed someone there with me. Now, with this being an EA title, you kind of expect some unnecessary add-on downloadable content on day one, and there was plenty to choose from, which I'm not a fan of or support. The good thing is you don't need any of it to get through this game, especially if you're playing on normal. It's certainly not so difficult to the point that you're going to need any of it. Plus, there's 2 known glitches right now that will allow you to gain infinite ammo and resources, which completely eliminates the need to purchase any DLC at all. There's enough new great features on here that going back and playing either of the previous 2 Dead Space titles might be kind of hard to do now that I've seen this one. But once I complete a game for the first time, there are very few titles that I would want to sit back down with and play through all over again, but both Dead Space 2 and 3 fit into that small select group. Dead Space 3 has multiple new Game Plus options, including Retro Mode, Classic Mode, which disables co-op and limits you to the old weapons from the previous games, Hardcore, which lets you save as much as you want but forces you to start all over if you die, Pure Survival, in which all ammo and health have to be crafted, and finally the standard tried and true New Game Plus option. Stacked up against either of the past 2 games, it features the same level of high quality, and with this many reasons to play through it again, even if you just remotely enjoyed this series, you need to pick this one up. I do feel it's a day one purchase. I still love Dead Space 2 more, but I'm really happy that I had a chance to play this one this week. I enjoyed almost all the new features and really don't have that much to gripe about. I didn't really care about the co-op feature, and I hate button mashing and time sequences, but this is a very solid game. It's everything that I had hoped for and met all my expectations. Finally, for those interested, I have finished the review for the Xbox 360 version of Omerta City of Gangsters, which I will be uploading Tuesday once it hits store shelves, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, this is Zero at ReviewZoneHD, and thanks for stopping by.